The subway was packed that evening. Suits, tired faces, the faint hum of the rails echoing through the underground tunnel. Among the crowd sat Victoria Collins, 7 months pregnant, one hand gently resting on her belly. Her husband, Richard Moore, stood beside her, scrolling through his phone, his jaw tight with irritation. "Can you stop embarrassing me for once?" Richard hissed under his breath. Victoria lowered her eyes, her fingers trembling. "I just said I wasn't feeling well, Richard. I didn't mean to." Before she could finish, his hand came crashing across her face. Slap. The sound was so loud it silenced the entire carriage. Her head snapped to the side, her cheek instantly flushing red. People froze. No one dared to move. "Please, stop," she whispered, tears mixing with the sting on her skin. Richard grabbed her arm, squeezing it hard enough to leave bruises. "You think you can talk back to me in public? You stupid woman." Then another slap, harder. Victoria fell from her seat, hitting the cold floor, clutching her belly as she gasped in pain. The world blurred. Panic flashed in her eyes. Across the aisle, Alexander Reed, a tall man in a gray tailored suit, closed his laptop and stood, his deep voice cut through the tense silence. "That's enough." Richard glared at him. "Mind your own business." Alexander's eyes darkened. "Not when a pregnant woman is being beaten in front of me." The other passengers turned away, afraid. Some filmed on their phones, but no one helped. Alexander stepped forward, positioning himself between Victoria and her husband. Richard shoved him, but Alexander didn't flinch. "Touch her again, and you'll regret it," he said firmly. Victoria tried to speak, her lips trembling. "Please, stop, my baby." Those words pierced Alexander's heart. Without hesitation, he crouched beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now, I promise." Richard sneered, trying to drag her away, but the train screeched to a halt. 2 security guards rushed in, alerted by the chaos. Alexander turned to them. "This man assaulted his pregnant wife in public. Check the security cameras." As Richard was restrained, he shouted, "You'll pay for this. She's my wife." Victoria sobbed quietly, unable to lift her swollen face. Alexander helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as they stepped off the train. Cameras flashed. People whispered. Outside the station, the night air was cool. Alexander removed his jacket, wrapping it around her trembling shoulders. "You need a hospital. I'll take you there." Victoria looked up, tears streaming down her bruised cheeks. "Why? Why would you help me?" He paused, his expression soft but haunted. "Because I once watched someone I loved suffer like you, and I swore I'd never stand by again." As the ambulance siren echoed in the distance, Victoria's world faded into darkness. Yet for the first time, she wasn't alone. The man who saved her was about to change everything. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room flickered above, washing everything in a pale, cold glow. Victoria Collins lay on the hospital bed, her face swollen, her lips cracked, one hand clutching her belly as monitors beeped beside her. Nurses hurried around, whispering words she barely understood. "Blood pressure's dropping. Keep her calm," one of them said. Through the blur of exhaustion and pain, Victoria caught a glimpse of Alexander Reed standing outside the glass door. His tailored suit was wrinkled now, his tie loosened, eyes heavy with concern. He hadn't left since the ambulance brought her in. A doctor approached him. "She's stable, but we'll keep her under observation. She's lucky the baby's heartbeat is strong." Alexander exhaled, his shoulders lowering for the first time that night. "Can I see her?" Moments later, he stepped inside. Victoria turned her head weakly, her eyes glistening under the harsh light. "You shouldn't have stayed," she whispered. "You don't even know me." He gave a faint smile. "I know what it's like to feel trapped." Silence filled the small room, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of machines. He placed a bottle of water by her bedside. "You need to stay hydrated. The doctor said rest is everything right now." Her throat tightened. "Thank you for saving me. If you hadn't," he interrupted softly. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself for surviving." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Richard used to be different. He promised he'd protect us. I believed him." Her voice cracked, trembling between guilt and grief. Alexander pulled up a chair, his gaze steady. "Abusers always start with promises. Then they isolate you until you forget who you are." She turned to him, surprised by the empathy in his voice. "You sound like you've been there." His jaw tensed. "My mother was. My father used to hit her. I was 12 when I realized silence was as cruel as violence." For a moment, Victoria forgot the pain. This stranger wasn't just a rescuer, he understood her nightmare. Then the door burst open. Linda and Henry Collins, her parents, rushed in, panic etched across their faces. Her mother gasped at the sight of Victoria's bruises. "Oh my God, my baby." Her father clenched his fists. "Where is that bastard?" Alexander stood, introducing himself quickly. "I'm Alexander Reed. I was there on the subway. She's safe now." Linda grabbed his hand. "Thank you. You're an angel." Victoria's voice wavered. "Mom, Dad, please don't fight. I just want peace." Her father's anger melted into sorrow. He kissed her forehead gently. "You'll never go back to him. We'll protect you." Outside, flashing cameras waited. The video of the subway assault had already gone viral. Reporters demanded statements. The world had seen Richard Moore's violence. Inside the room, Alexander looked down at Victoria, his tone calm but resolute. "You don't have to face him alone anymore." Victoria reached for his hand, her fingers trembling. For the first time in months, she felt warmth instead of fear. But outside that hospital, Richard was already planning his next move. Morning sunlight crept through the hospital blinds, painting soft stripes across Victoria Collins's bruised face. The painkillers dulled her body but couldn't silence her fear. She kept replaying last night in her head, the slaps, the screams, the man who saved her. Her phone buzzed on the bedside table. Unknown number. Her heart skipped. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Victoria," a cold, familiar voice hissed. "It's me." Her chest tightened. "Richard, how did you get this number?" He chuckled darkly. "You really think a few security guards can keep me away? You've embarrassed me in front of the entire city. Do you know what people are saying about me?" Victoria's hand trembled. "You hit me, Richard. You could have killed our child." "I did what I had to do," he snapped. "You made me angry. You always make me angry." Before she could respond, Alexander Reed walked in holding a bag of breakfast. He froze, sensing the tension. "Who is that?" Richard heard his voice. His tone turned venomous. "Who's there with you? Don't tell me it's that rich stranger. You think he'll love a broken woman like you? He'll toss you aside the moment the headlines fade." Victoria's tears spilled silently. Alexander took the phone, his voice calm but firm. "This is Alexander Reed. If you contact her again, I'll have you arrested for harassment." Richard's laugh crackled through the speaker. "You think your money can scare me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Click. The call ended. Alexander set the phone down gently, his jaw tight. "He's dangerous. I'll arrange protection for you." Victoria stared at the blanket, whispering, "He wasn't always this way. I used to love him so much." Alexander softened. "Love doesn't mean letting someone destroy you." Outside the hospital room, the media frenzy grew louder. News outlets played the subway footage non-stop. The headline read, "Millionaire CEO Richard Moore abuses pregnant wife in public." His reputation, once spotless, was collapsing overnight. At his corporate office downtown, Richard stormed into the boardroom. His assistant, Melissa Carter, the same woman he'd been secretly seeing, looked pale as reporters crowded the building. "This is a nightmare, Richard," she said. "The investors are pulling out. The board wants a statement." Richard slammed his fist on the table. "I built this empire. No one tells me what to do." Melissa hesitated. "Maybe apologize. Show remorse, just until things calm down." He glared at her. "You think I'll apologize to that ungrateful woman? She ruined everything." Melissa looked away, guilt flickering in her eyes. She'd never seen him this unhinged. Back at the hospital, Victoria's parents sat beside her, quietly holding hands. Her mother whispered, "Sweetheart, you need to file for divorce." Victoria nodded slowly. "I will, but I'm scared." Alexander leaned forward. "You won't be alone in this. I'll stand by you every step." For the first time, hope flickered in her tired eyes. But deep down, she knew Richard wouldn't let her go easily. Outside, a black car waited across the street, Richard's driver. Someone inside was watching the hospital entrance. The day had barely begun when Alexander Reed noticed the black sedan parked across the hospital entrance. Its tinted windows gleamed under the weak morning sun. He'd seen it twice already, once late last night, now again in the same spot. Something wasn't right. Inside, Victoria Collins sat upright in her bed, sipping tea her mother brought. Her cheeks were still bruised, but the swelling had gone down slightly. The color was slowly returning to her face, though her eyes carried the exhaustion of sleepless nights. Her father, Henry, paced the room, muttering curses under his breath. That maniac is probably plotting something. I should have broken his jaw years ago. Dad, please, Victoria said softly. I just want peace. Peace? He barked. Peace doesn't come from silence, sweetheart. It comes from justice. Before she could respond, a nurse entered. Miss Collins, there's someone asking for you at the front desk. He said he's from your husband's company. Victoria froze. Her mother, Linda, instinctively stepped forward. Tell him she's not seeing anyone. But Alexander had already moved toward the door. I'll handle it. Downstairs, the lobby buzzed with journalists, flashing cameras and murmurs about the viral subway video. Near the entrance stood a young man in a suit, clutching an envelope. He looked nervous. Can I help you? Alexander asked. The man's eyes darted around. I was told to deliver this to Mrs. Moore, Mrs. Collins. Alexander took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A subpoena for custody and defamation. Richard was suing her, claiming she had attacked him first, and that the viral footage was misleading. Alexander's jaw tightened. Tell your boss he just made the biggest mistake of his life. The man backed away, nearly tripping over his own feet. I'm just the messenger, sir. Alexander turned to see several reporters filming the exchange. He pocketed the envelope, then marched straight back upstairs. Victoria's face went pale when she read it. He's suing me? After everything? Her mother gasped. That monster has no shame. Alexander placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He's desperate. Men like him only lash out when they start losing control. But he won't win this time. Victoria blinked back tears. What if he takes my baby away? He won't, Alexander said firmly. I'll make sure of it. My legal team is already preparing your defense. You'll be safe. At that moment, a security guard entered. Mr. Reed, sir, there's a car outside that's been parked for hours. No one's come out. Alexander's eyes narrowed. Keep watch. If anyone approaches, call the police immediately. Through the window, Victoria saw the same black car. Her pulse quickened. That's his driver. Richard's watching me, isn't he? Alexander took her hand gently. Let him watch. It'll only show him you're not afraid anymore. She looked at him, her lip trembling. I wish I was that strong. He smiled faintly. You already are. Outside, the black sedan's engine roared to life and slowly pulled away, but not before a camera lens flashed from the passenger window, capturing a photo of Alexander and Victoria holding hands. Somewhere downtown, Richard Moore smiled darkly as he looked at the picture. If she wants war, I'll give her one. 3 days later, a pale winter sun glowed faintly above the city skyline. Victoria Collins sat in a wheelchair near her hospital window, staring out at the world that suddenly felt hostile and loud. She hadn't left the hospital since the subway incident. The thought of facing Richard Moore again made her stomach tighten. The door opened, and Alexander Reed entered, carrying a stack of papers. He looked exhausted, unshaven, his tie loosened, but his voice remained steady. The court has scheduled the first hearing for next Tuesday. He's pushing for emergency custody and defamation damages. Victoria's hand trembled as she took the papers. He wants custody of my baby? He doesn't even care about us. He doesn't want the baby, Alexander replied gently. He wants control. He's trying to punish you for standing up to him. Her mother, Linda, crossed her arms. Let him try. We'll expose every bruise, every hospital record. The world saw what he did. Alexander nodded. We have evidence. The subway footage, witness statements, and now the medical reports. His lawyer is already trying to spin the story, claiming it was a mutual argument. Victoria laughed bitterly, though tears glistened in her eyes. Mutual? I was 7 months pregnant. He crouched beside her, lowering his voice. We'll win, Victoria. I promise. She looked at him, noticing the fatigue behind his calm. Why are you helping me so much, Alexander? You barely know me. He hesitated. Because I couldn't help my mother. She lived with a man just like Richard. I watched her break a little more every day until she couldn't anymore. I swore I'd never let that happen again. Not if I could stop it. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside her bed. Then the nurse entered with a manila envelope. Delivery for Miss Collins. Alexander took it, opening it cautiously. Inside was a single photo, a picture of Victoria and Alexander holding hands in the hospital room. Beneath it, a message scrawled in ink. See you in court, R. Victoria covered her mouth, horrified. He's following us. Alexander's voice hardened. Not for long. I'll request a restraining order immediately. Her father, Henry, clenched his fists. That coward's hiding behind lawyers. I'd like to see him try that in front of me. Alexander placed a firm hand on his shoulder. We'll fight with the law, not our fists. That's how we win. Later that evening, as the sky turned violet, Alexander stepped outside to take a call from his legal team. Victoria watched him through the window, his silhouette outlined by the soft glow of streetlights. Something in his calm presence made her feel safe, something she hadn't felt in years. Her mother whispered, "He's a good man, honey." Victoria nodded slowly, her voice barely a breath. "I know." But deep down, fear still lingered. Because she knew Richard Moore wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat quietly. Across the city, in his penthouse office, Richard poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring at their photo. "If she wants a fight," he muttered, "I'll burn her world before she burns mine." The night was long and heavy inside Richard Moore's penthouse. Half-empty whiskey glasses covered his desk, and the city lights flickered like taunts outside his window. He sat slouched in a leather chair, scrolling through headlines that destroyed his once perfect image. CEO caught abusing pregnant wife on subway. Public fury erupts over Moore's domestic violence scandal. He slammed his laptop shut, veins pulsing on his temple. "They think I'm the villain? I made her who she is," he shouted to no one. From across the room, Melissa Carter, his former secretary and secret lover, entered quietly. She wore a silk robe, her expression tense. "Richard, you need to calm down. The board is calling for your resignation. Your investors are backing out." He spun toward her. "Don't you dare lecture me. You enjoyed my money, my power, and now you want to walk away?" Melissa folded her arms. "I didn't sign up for this mess. The media's camped outside my apartment. They're calling me the other woman." Richard poured another drink, sneering, "You should have thought about that before you crawled into my bed." Her eyes narrowed. "You're going to lose everything, Richard. Maybe it's time to take responsibility." He threw the glass against the wall, shattering it. "Responsibility? She humiliated me. She made me look weak. That stranger, Alexander Reed, he thinks he's her savior? I'll destroy them both." Melissa hesitated. "What are you planning?" Richard smirked, dark and deliberate. "A little reminder that I'm still in control. My lawyer's filing another motion tomorrow, claiming emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and that I was set up. But that's not all." He opened a drawer, pulling out a flash drive. "This contains private security footage from our house. Edited right, it'll look like she was the aggressor. Once I leak it, the public will start doubting her story." Melissa gasped. "That's illegal, Richard. You can't." He cut her off sharply. "I can and I will. By the time I'm done, she'll be the one begging for mercy." Meanwhile, across town, Victoria Collins sat in her hospital bed, unaware of the storm forming against her. Alexander Reed entered quietly with a smile. The judge granted the restraining order. "Richard can't come within 500 feet of you." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you, Alexander. I finally feel safe." He sat beside her, his tone gentle. "You're strong, Victoria. You've survived more than most people ever could." She smiled faintly. "I don't feel strong. I just feel tired." He chuckled softly. "That's what strength looks like." But before peace could settle, her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Richard, it was a notification. A new video had gone viral online. The title read, "Shocking footage. Did Victoria attack her husband first?" Her blood ran cold. She tapped play, and her heart dropped. The edited clip showed only fragments, her shouting, his fake flinch, the camera cutting before his violent blows. Alexander's jaw clenched. "He's manipulating the truth," Victoria whispered. "He's turning everyone against me." Alexander met her eyes, his voice steel. "Then we'll expose him, every lie, every secret." But neither of them knew. Richard had just set a trap that could destroy everything. The next morning, the world had already turned against Victoria Collins. News anchors debated whether the new evidence proved she had started the fight. Social media buzzed with opinions from strangers who had never met her, but suddenly felt entitled to judge. At the hospital, Alexander Reed stood near the window, reading through the online comments on his phone. His jaw tightened as he scrolled. "They're buying it," he muttered. "People actually think you attacked him." Victoria sat on the edge of the bed, holding her newborn sonogram picture close to her chest. Her voice shook. I can't believe this is happening again. Every time I try to stand up, he finds a way to push me down. Alexander knelt beside her, steady but intense. Then we push back harder. I've already contacted a forensic media analyst. We'll prove the footage is doctored. She looked up, eyes wet. He won't stop until he destroys me. Then we won't stop until he destroys himself, Alexander said. Across the city, in a quiet law office, Richard Moore met with his lawyer, Mr. Keller, a slick man with cold eyes and an expensive watch. The video worked, Keller said, smirking. Public opinion's shifting. By the time we get to court, half the jury pool will think she's unstable. Richard leaned back, satisfied. Good, keep feeding the press. Make sure everyone sees her as a liar. I want her credibility buried before she ever takes the stand. What about the restraining order? Keller asked. Richard smirked. That's easy. I won't go near her. I'll let someone else do it for me. That night, as rain lashed against the hospital windows, a janitor in a gray uniform slipped quietly down the hallway. His name tag read, Marcus. He pushed a cart, humming softly, but his eyes darted toward Victoria's room. Inside his pocket buzzed a phone. A text from Richard flashed on the screen. Get the drive. Leave no trace. Moments later, Marcus knocked on the door. Evening, ma'am. Just need to empty the trash. Linda, Victoria's mother, smiled politely and let him in. But Alexander, who had stayed late, watched the man too closely. Something in his movement felt rehearsed. Marcus lingered near the nightstand where Alexander had placed the original copy of the subway footage, the real evidence showing Richard's attack. Alexander's instincts screamed. Hey, he said sharply. Marcus froze, eyes wide. Then he bolted. Alexander lunged forward, catching him just as the man yanked the flash drive from the drawer. The two struggled. The cart toppled, scattering supplies across the floor. Nurses screamed for security. Within seconds, guards rushed in and restrained the fake janitor. Alexander retrieved the flash drive, breathing hard. Victoria clutched her blanket, shaking. He sent someone here. To steal the evidence? Alexander nodded grimly. He's desperate. He knows this is what can end him. Later, as police escorted Marcus away, Victoria looked at Alexander with trembling resolve. He's playing dirty. Maybe it's time I stop being afraid. Alexander met her gaze. Then let's fight back together. Outside the hospital, Richard watched from his car, rain streaking the windshield. His lips curled into a smile. Perfect, he whispered. She took the bait. The next morning, headlines screamed across every news channel. New twist in Moore scandal. Wife accused of manipulating evidence. Victim or villain? Public divided over pregnant wife's story. Sitting in her hospital bed, Victoria Collins felt the weight of every cruel headline pressing on her chest. Her swollen face had faded into soft bruises, but her spirit carried fresh wounds. Her father, Henry, slammed his hand on the table. This is garbage. They're twisting everything. Alexander handed him a tablet. It's worse than that. Richard's PR team hired bots to flood social media with fake posts. They're trying to rewrite the story in real time. Victoria stared blankly at the screen. People believed I attacked him? After everything? Alexander's voice was calm, controlled. They believe what they're told, until someone shows them the truth. That's what we'll do. He picked up his phone and made a call. Lily, prepare the press statement. We're going public today. A few hours later, a press conference was arranged in the hospital's small auditorium. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters whispered as Alexander stepped up to the podium beside Victoria and her parents. He began, his voice steady but sharp. The woman beside me is not a liar. She's a survivor. The video circulating online was digitally altered to hide her husband's abuse. We have the original footage verified by independent experts, and we will present it to the court. The room buzzed with murmurs. Cameras flashed like lightning. Victoria's hands shook as she took the microphone. I never wanted this attention. I just wanted peace. But silence only protects the guilty. So I'm speaking. For myself and for every woman too afraid to speak. Her voice quivered, but her eyes burned with new strength. Reporters leaned closer, captivated. Across town, Richard Moore watched the press conference live on TV. He smashed his remote onto the table. She's painting herself as a hero. Melissa, sitting on the couch, muttered. Maybe she is. He turned sharply. What did you just say? Nothing, she said quickly, but fear flickered in her eyes. Back at the hospital, the press conference ended. As Victoria returned to her room, a young nurse approached nervously. "Ma'am, there's someone waiting outside who wants to see you. He says it's urgent." Alexander frowned. "Who?" The nurse hesitated. He wouldn't give his name. Outside the hospital doors, the cold wind howled. A man in a dark coat stood under the awning, face hidden by a cap. When he lifted his head, Victoria gasped. It was Richard's brother, Nathan Moore, a man she hadn't seen in years. "Victoria," Nathan said quietly, "we need to talk. There's something you don't know about Richard." Alexander stepped protectively beside her. "If this is another trap," Nathan raised his hands. "It's not. I'm not like him. But you're both in danger. Tony. Richard's not just after revenge. He's hiding something far worse." Victoria's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" Nathan looked around nervously, lowering his voice. "He's laundering money through his company. If he goes down, he'll take you with him." Alexander's eyes darkened. "Then it's time we stop playing defense." The hospital parking lot was nearly empty, the air heavy with drizzle. Victoria Collins clutched her coat tighter as Nathan Moore looked around nervously, making sure no one was listening. Alexander Reed stood beside her, protective but cautious. Nathan's voice was low. "Richard's not just fighting for his reputation. He's fighting to stay out of prison." Alexander crossed his arms. "Explain." Nathan took a deep breath. "For years, Richard has been using more industries to launder money. Shell companies, offshore accounts, fake invoices. I found out by accident 6 months ago. When I confronted him, he threatened to ruin me if I ever spoke." Victoria's eyes widened. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "Because I was scared," Nathan admitted, shame flickering across his face. "He controls everything. The lawyers, the accountants, everyone's on his payroll. But when I saw what he did to you on the subway, I couldn't stay silent anymore." Alexander studied him. "You have proof?" Nathan nodded and pulled a small flash drive from his jacket. "Every transaction, every hidden account, enough to destroy him." Alexander took the drive carefully. "This could change everything." Nathan shook his head. "It could also get you both killed. Richard has people watching you. That stunt at the hospital, he orchestrated it to make you slip up. He wants you emotional, reckless." Victoria whispered. "He already took everything from me. What more can he take?" Nathan's eyes darkened. "Your freedom. If the feds find these accounts before we reveal the truth, he'll pin them on you. Your name's still listed on several of the shell companies. He made sure of that." Victoria gasped. He used my name?" Alexander clenched his jaw. "Then we expose him before he can twist the narrative. We'll go to the authorities ourselves, with you as the whistleblower." Nathan hesitated. "You don't understand, Alexander. He has friends in high places, people who owe him favors. If you go public now, he'll know I betrayed him." Alexander's tone softened. "You're already in danger, but if we work together, we can bring him down safely." Nathan looked at Victoria. "I'm sorry for not warning you sooner. You didn't deserve any of this." Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you for telling me. I just want my baby to be safe." Alexander squeezed her hand. "He will be." Before they could say more, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot, headlights slicing through the mist. Nathan's expression turned to panic. "That's his car. He must have been tracking my phone." Alexander stepped in front of Victoria. "Get inside the hospital now." Nathan shoved the flash drive into Alexander's hand. "Keep it safe. If I disappear, use it." As the SUV doors flew open, 2 men in dark suits stepped out. Nathan ran toward the opposite exit, yelling, "Go! Don't look back!" Victoria screamed, "Nathan!" Alexander grabbed her and pulled her inside as the sound of footsteps and shouting echoed across the lot. By the time security arrived, the SUV was gone. So was Nathan. Victoria collapsed against Alexander's chest, trembling. "He took my last family too," Alexander whispered. "No, he gave us the key to end this." Far away in that speeding SUV, Richard Moore smiled coldly. "Family always ruins everything." The hospital corridor echoed with footsteps and whispered panic. Victoria Collins sat in a wheelchair near the nurse's station, clutching her belly, her mind spinning. Nathan Moore was gone, vanished into the night, and all that remained was the small flash drive Alexander Reed now held in his hand. He studied the silver device, his expression unreadable. "Whatever's on this could destroy Richard," he said quietly. "But it could also put you in danger, Victoria." She looked up, eyes glistening. "I don't care anymore. He's ruined too many lives. We need to end this." Her father, Henry, who had arrived minutes earlier, growled. Then we hand it to the police. Alexander shook his head. Not yet. We don't know who's on Richard's payroll. We release this to the wrong person, and it disappears. Victoria's mother, Linda, whispered. So what do we do? Alexander's gaze hardened. We find someone we can trust, a federal investigator outside Richard's circle. Later that night, Alexander sat in his office downtown, lights dimmed, rain tapping against the windows. His computer screen glowed as he inserted the flash drive. A folder appeared labeled More Holdings, Confidential. Inside were hundreds of documents, wire transfers, offshore account numbers, fake charity donations, and most shocking of all, emails showing Richard had funneled millions into illegal contracts overseas. Alexander scrolled faster, his pulse quickening. He's been laundering money through humanitarian foundations, he muttered. That's how he bought silence. He called out softly, Lily, get in here, and his assistant rushed in. What is it, Mr. Reed? I need you to encrypt this drive and back it up on 3 secure servers. If something happens to me, make sure Victoria gets everything. Lily blinked, confused. Something happens to you? Sir, is this about the Moore case? Alexander looked out the window, watching lightning split the sky. It's about the truth, and the truth has enemies. Across town, in the darkened penthouse, Richard Moore poured himself another drink, staring at a photo of his brother. You think you can betray me, Nathan? He murmured. You were always the weak one. Melissa hovered near the doorway. Richard, maybe we should stop this. People are disappearing. If the police find out, he turned sharply. If you're scared, leave. But remember, you're in this as deep as I am. Melissa swallowed hard and said nothing. The next morning, Alexander returned to the hospital. Victoria was sitting by the window, a newspaper on her lap. He hasn't called, she whispered. Nathan, what if he's gone for good? Alexander sat beside her. We'll find him. And when we do, we'll make sure his risk wasn't for nothing. She reached out, touching his hand. You don't have to protect me, Alexander. He met her gaze softly. I'm not protecting you, Victoria. I'm standing with you. Just then, a nurse rushed in, breathless. Mr. Reed, someone left this envelope at the front desk for you. Alexander tore it open. Inside was a single photo, Nathan tied to a chair, bruised and terrified. A note was scrawled across the bottom, return the drive, or the next picture will be worse. Victoria gasped, covering her mouth. Oh my God, he's alive. Alexander's jaw tightened. And Richard just told us exactly where to hit him. The photo of Nathan Moore lay on the table like a silent scream. His face was swollen, a bruise darkening his jaw, fear visible even through the grainy image. Victoria Collins stared at it, her breath shallow. He's alive, she whispered. But for how long? Alexander Reed's expression hardened. Richard's taunting us. He wants the flash drive back, but that drive is his confession. Victoria's mother, Linda, clutched her daughter's arm. You can't go near him. Promise me you won't. Alexander shook his head. We won't go near him, but we'll go around him. He spread a map across the table. Nathan's likely being held somewhere private, somewhere Richard controls completely. We'll need information from the inside. Victoria frowned. Who would help us? Everyone who works for him is terrified. Not everyone, Alexander replied. Melissa Carter. She's still in his shadow, but she's cracking. Guilt eats people alive, faster than fear. An hour later, Alexander dialed a number from a blocked line. The call rang twice before a tense voice answered. Melissa speaking. Melissa, it's Alexander Reed. I know what Richard's done, and I know you do too. Nathan's alive. Help us find him. There was a long silence. If he finds out I talked to you, I'm dead. He already thinks you're disposable, Alexander said coldly. The moment you stop being useful, you'll end up like Nathan. Melissa exhaled shakily. There's an old warehouse on Pier 19. It used to be one of his import sites. He's been using it again, quietly. If Nathan's still breathing, that's where he'll be. Thank you, Alexander said. You just did the right thing. Before she hung up, Melissa's voice cracked. Tell Victoria I'm sorry. Alexander turned to Victoria. We move tonight. Her eyes widened. Tonight? Alexander, I can't. He cut her off gently. You're not coming? I need you safe. I'll go with private security. Once Nathan's out, we hand everything to the authorities. She grabbed his hand, her voice trembling. Please be careful. I can't lose you too. He smiled faintly. You won't. That night, the city was wrapped in fog. A convoy of black SUVs rolled quietly through the empty streets toward Pier 19. Alexander sat in the front seat, his jaw set, the flash drive secured in a metal case beside him. "Team Alpha, positions," he said through the earpiece. "North entry clear," came the reply. "South clear," another voice added. The warehouse loomed ahead, a rusted shell by the waterfront. Lights glowed faintly inside. Alexander motioned for silence and pushed the door open. The air smelled of oil and decay. Then, a muffled sound, a groan. Alexander followed it to a small office at the back. Nathan sat tied to a chair, barely conscious. "Easy," Alexander whispered, cutting the ropes. "You're safe now." But as he lifted Nathan, a red laser dot appeared on his chest. A voice echoed from the shadows. "Well?" Richard's cold tone sneered. The hero finally arrived. A gun clicked in the darkness, and Victoria's world was about to change again. The red laser dot slid slowly up Alexander Reed's chest until it rested just below his throat. From the shadows, Richard Moore stepped forward, gun in hand, his smirk sharp enough to cut glass. The faint hum of the harbor echoed behind him. "I should have known you'd come," Richard said coldly. "Always playing the hero, Alexander. Tell me, how does it feel saving the women I'm done with?" Alexander kept his hands visible, calm but alert. "You're a coward, Richard. Hiding behind money, guns, and lies." Richard laughed, the sound hollow. "Lies? Everything I've done to protect what's mine. You think Victoria's innocent? She was part of my business. Her name's on those accounts, remember?" Behind Alexander, Nathan stirred weakly, coughing. "Stop lying, Richard. You forged everything. You." A gunshot cracked through the air. The bullet missed Nathan's shoulder by inches, embedding in the metal wall. Richard sneered. "Next one won't miss." Alexander stepped in front of Nathan, voice steady. "If you shoot him, there's no one left to clean your mess." For a brief moment, their eyes locked, the abuser and the protector, fire against ice. Outside, black SUVs waited. Alexander's security team listened through his earpiece, waiting for the signal. Inside, Alexander stalled for time. "You think killing us fixes anything? The flash drive's already backed up. If something happens to me, every file goes public." Richard hesitated, eyes flickering. "You're bluffing." Alexander tilted his head slightly. "Try me." Richard's hand trembled just enough to show fear. Then he regained composure. "Fine. Maybe I don't need you dead, just broken." Suddenly, two men appeared behind him, armed. They grabbed Alexander, forcing him to his knees. Richard leaned close, whispering, "Let's see how the savior handles pain." Alexander gritted his teeth as one guard struck him across the face. Blood trickled from his lip. Still, he smiled. "That all you've got?" Richard raised the gun again, but before he could pull the trigger, a voice shouted from behind. "Drop it!" The warehouse door burst open. Red and blue lights flooded the room as police stormed in. Victoria's voice echoed through the chaos. "Alexander!" Richard spun around, stunned. "You shouldn't be here." Victoria stepped forward, holding up her phone. "You're done, Richard. Everything you said, everything you did, it's all been recorded." He froze. "What?" "I called the police the second Alexander left. You were so busy threatening him, you didn't realize your location was being traced." The guards hesitated, lowering their weapons as officers closed in. Richard roared, "You ruined me." He lunged toward Victoria, but Alexander surged to his feet, tackling him to the ground. The gun skidded across the floor. Officers restrained Richard as he thrashed, screaming her name like a curse. Victoria dropped beside Alexander, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You're bleeding." He managed a faint grin. "Worth it." As police dragged Richard away in handcuffs, his shouts echoed through the empty warehouse. "You think this is over? I'll destroy you both." Victoria looked at him one last time. "You already destroyed yourself." Outside, dawn broke over the harbor, light finally piercing through years of darkness. The sun had barely risen when the sirens faded from the docks. Victoria Collins sat wrapped in a blanket on the back of an ambulance, her hands trembling around a cup of coffee. The salty air stung her bruised lips, but for the first time in months, she could breathe. Across from her, Alexander Reed sat on the tailgate of another ambulance, a paramedic cleaning the cut on his cheek. His white shirt was torn, blood seeping through the collar, but his eyes never left Victoria. When the medic finished, Alexander stood and walked toward her. "You shouldn't have come, Victoria," he said softly. She looked up, a tired smile tugging at her mouth. "You really thought I'd let you walk into that place alone?" He shook his head, half amused, half angry. You could have been killed. I almost was, she admitted, but I couldn't stay in that hospital knowing you were out here fighting for me. Her voice cracked, and he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You're impossible. I've been told that before, she whispered. An officer approached. Mr. Reed, Mrs. Collins, Richard Moore has been taken into custody. We found Nathan Moore inside the warehouse. He's shaken, but alive. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. Nathan. Minutes later, she ran to the stretcher where Nathan lay, pale but conscious. He managed a weak grin. You really know how to make an entrance. She laughed through her tears. You scared me half to death. Nathan's eyes softened. I owed you the truth. Now maybe we can finally sleep again. Police swarmed the area, collecting evidence. Reporters had already begun to gather beyond the barricades, shouting questions about the billionaire abuse scandal. Cameras flashed relentlessly, but Alexander positioned himself between Victoria and the chaos, shielding her from the noise. Let's get you home, he said gently. I don't even know where home is anymore, she whispered. He looked at her, voice steady. Then we'll make a new one. That night, at Alexander's penthouse, Victoria sat curled on the sofa as the city lights shimmered below. Nathan was resting in the guest room, safe under security detail. On the coffee table lay the flash drive, the evidence that would bury Richard's empire forever. Alexander poured her a glass of water and sat beside her. Tomorrow, we'll hand everything to the federal investigators. Once this goes public, Richard won't have a single friend left. Victoria nodded slowly. And what about Melissa? She's agreed to testify, Alexander said. She's terrified, but she wants to make things right. Silence lingered between them, heavy but peaceful. For the first time, Victoria wasn't looking over her shoulder. She rested her head against Alexander's shoulder. You saved me twice now. I don't know how to thank you. He smiled faintly. Don't. Just promise me you'll never let anyone silence you again. Her eyes filled with tears. I promise. Below them, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, Richard being transferred to a federal holding facility. Victoria closed her eyes, whispering, It's over. Alexander looked out over the skyline. No, he murmured, it's just the beginning. But far from the city, in a police van headed for the detention center, Richard Moore opened his eyes and smirked. They really think they've won. 2 weeks later, the city buzzed with anticipation. Every newspaper headline carried the same name. Richard Moore, the man once hailed as a financial genius, was now the most infamous face in America. His trial for fraud, assault, and witness intimidation was set to begin. Inside Alexander Reed's penthouse, Victoria Collins stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring at the gray winter sky. She had traded hospital gowns for simple sweaters, but the bruises on her spirit still lingered. Behind her, Alexander's voice broke the silence. The prosecutors called this morning. They want you to testify next week. Victoria turned, nerves flickering across her face. I knew this day would come. I just didn't think I'd be strong enough for it. Alexander stepped closer. You don't have to be fearless, Victoria. You just have to be honest. The truth will do the rest. She nodded, glancing at the flash drive on the table. That tiny piece of metal has more power than any of us. Alexander smiled faintly. And Richard knows it. That's why he's desperate. Later that afternoon, Nathan Moore joined them, leaning heavily on a cane. The doctors say I'll be fine. Just a few more weeks. He sat beside Victoria. You look better. I feel better, she said softly. For the first time in years, I'm not scared to breathe. Nathan exhaled. You'll need that strength in court. Richard's lawyers are vicious. They'll try to paint you as unstable. Alexander crossed his arms. Let them try. We have proof. Wire transfers, fake charities, and his confession to Melissa. Victoria's expression darkened. Speaking of Melissa, where is she? Nathan hesitated. She's under protection. The FBI's keeping her hidden until trial. Richard's men are still out there. As the hours passed, tension filled the air. Victoria practiced her testimony, her voice shaking each time she repeated the words. He hit me. He told me I was nothing. Alexander watched quietly, his chest tightening with each tremor in her voice. He admired her courage, even when she doubted herself. That evening, he poured her a cup of tea and sat beside her. Do you ever wonder what comes after all this? Victoria smiled sadly. I used to dream about escaping him. Now I dream about peace. Maybe a home where my son can grow up without fear." Alexander looked at her tenderly. "That sounds perfect." Their silence was warm, filled with unspoken words. But across town in a dimly lit cell, Richard Moore sat with a sly grin. His lawyer leaned in, whispering, "They've built a strong case, but there's still one angle we can play." Richard smirked. "Let me guess, discredit the victim." "Exactly," the lawyer replied. "We'll claim she exaggerated the abuse to gain sympathy. If we can shake her credibility, we can create doubt." Richard chuckled lowly. "Victoria always was emotional. All we need is one mistake from her on the stand." He leaned back, eyes glinting. "And I know exactly what button to press." Back at the penthouse, as Victoria finally drifted to sleep, Alexander covered her with a blanket and whispered, "You're safe now." But as he looked out at the city lights, a chill ran down his spine. Somewhere deep inside, he knew Richard Moore wasn't finished yet. The courthouse stood like a fortress of glass and steel, surrounded by flashing cameras and restless reporters. The cold March wind carried the buzz of the crowd. Everyone wanted to see Richard Moore, the fallen millionaire, face justice. Inside the marble lobby, Victoria Collins gripped the edges of her coat, her knuckles white. Her heart pounded as photographers shouted her name. Beside her, Alexander Reed guided her gently through the chaos. "Ignore them," he murmured. "Today isn't about them. It's about truth." Victoria nodded, taking a shaky breath. "Truth," she whispered, almost like a prayer. As they entered the courtroom, the noise outside faded into a tense silence. Judge Avery, an older woman with steel-gray hair, presided at the bench. Richard sat at the defense table, wearing an expensive navy suit, his composure chillingly calm. When his eyes met Victoria's, he smiled faintly, a predator's smile. The prosecutor began. "Your Honor, the people will prove that the defendant, Richard Moore, engaged in repeated physical and emotional abuse against his pregnant wife, committed financial crimes to conceal illicit funds, and attempted to intimidate witnesses." Richard's lawyer, Mr. Keller, rose smoothly. "My client is a respected businessman and philanthropist. This is a vendetta, a smear campaign orchestrated by an emotional ex-wife and her wealthy lover." Alexander's jaw tightened. He leaned toward Victoria. "They're going to attack your character. Don't let them see fear." When Victoria took the stand, the courtroom seemed to shrink. She raised her right hand, voice trembling as she swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor approached gently. "Mrs. Collins, can you describe what happened on the subway that night?" Her throat tightened, but she spoke clearly. "He hit me. In front of strangers. I begged him to stop, but he didn't care. I was 7 months pregnant." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. She continued, tears welling. "That wasn't the first time. He controlled everything. What I wore, who I spoke to, even what I ate. I thought if I loved him enough, he'd stop." The prosecutor nodded. "And who helped you that night?" She glanced at Alexander. "A stranger, but he became the reason I'm still alive." When the cross-examination began, Mr. Keller paced slowly. "Mrs. Collins, isn't it true that you benefited financially from your husband's success?" "I never asked for money," she said firmly. "But you enjoyed the lifestyle? Cars, vacations, luxury homes?" "I enjoyed believing I was safe," she replied. Keller smiled thinly. "And now, conveniently, you're living with another billionaire. Sounds like a pattern, doesn't it?" Alexander clenched his fists, but Victoria's voice cut through the tension. "The only pattern here is men like you defending men like him." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Avery banged her gavel. "Order." Keller smirked, realizing he'd lost control. As Victoria stepped down from the stand, Alexander met her halfway, whispering, "You did perfect." But from the defense table, Richard leaned toward his lawyer. "She's stronger than I thought," he murmured. "Then it's time to show her what real power looks like." Outside, storm clouds gathered over the courthouse, thunder rumbling like a warning. The war for truth had only just begun. The following morning, tension hung thick inside the courtroom. The world was watching, every network camera trained on the trial that had turned Richard Moore from celebrated CEO to public disgrace. Victoria Collins sat beside Alexander Reed, her palms sweating as the prosecutor carried a small metal case to the front. The flash drive, the one Nathan had risked his life to retrieve, gleamed under the lights. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "the state will now present digital evidence obtained from the defendant's private accounts, proving a pattern of criminal activity, fraud, and coercion." Richard's lawyer, Mr. Keller, immediately stood. Objection. The chain of custody for this so-called evidence is questionable at best. Judge Avery's firm voice cut through the noise. Overruled. Proceed. The technician connected the drive to a large monitor. Within seconds, spreadsheets, emails, and offshore transaction logs filled the screen. The courtroom gasped as each line revealed millions of dollars moved through fake charities and shell corporations, all under Richard's signature. The prosecutor pointed. Note the forged authorizations under the name Victoria Collins, used without her consent. Richard leaned back, forcing a laugh. Ridiculous. Anyone could have made those. I was set up. The prosecutor smirked. Then perhaps you can explain the email you sent your accountant 3 days before your arrest. A single email appeared on screen. Make sure my wife's name stays on the accounts. If this goes south, she takes the fall. The silence was deafening. Victoria covered her mouth, tears streaming down. Alexander's hand tightened around hers. It's over, he whispered. But Richard wasn't finished. You think this proves anything? My brother stole those files. He doctored them. Nathan stood from the gallery, voice trembling but strong. I didn't doctor anything. I watched you do it, Richard. You blackmailed me, and when I tried to stop you, you had me beaten. Gasps filled the courtroom again. Reporters scribbled furiously. Judge Avery raised an eyebrow. Mr. Moore, this is your last warning. Any further outbursts and you'll be removed. Richard sneered but stayed silent. The prosecutor continued. Your Honor, the state also calls Melissa Carter to the stand. A hush fell over the room as Melissa entered, dressed simply, eyes red but resolute. She took the oath, then met Richard's gaze. I was his accomplice, she began, voice quivering. I helped hide the money, forge signatures, even lie to the press. But when I saw what he did to Victoria, I couldn't live with it anymore. Richard shot to his feet. Liar! Melissa flinched but went on. He told me if I didn't help him, he'd make me disappear too. Her statement hit like a thunderclap. Alexander's jaw clenched. Victoria reached out, whispering, "Thank you." The prosecutor faced the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not just about money. This is about a man who believed he was untouchable, until the people he hurt decided to fight back. As court adjourned for the day, reporters swarmed the hallway, microphones flashing like lightning. Alexander leaned toward Victoria. Tomorrow, the verdict begins to form. But as they walked away, Richard's cold eyes followed them. His lips curved into a quiet, dangerous smile. You may have won the room, he muttered, but you haven't won the war. The courthouse emptied under a gray sky. Cameras still flashed outside as Victoria Collins and Alexander Reed made their way through the reporters. The storm of questions was deafening. Victoria, how does it feel facing your abuser? Alexander, are you financing her legal battle? Is it true the defendant tried to bribe a witness? Security pushed them into the car, shutting the noise out. Victoria leaned back in her seat, heart pounding. It's almost over, she whispered. Alexander glanced at her, his jaw tense. Almost, but not yet. Across town, inside a detention center cell, Richard Moore sat at the metal table, his reflection glaring back from the stainless steel surface. His lawyer, Mr. Keller, entered, looking uneasy. They're closing in, Richard. The evidence is overwhelming. The emails, Melissa's testimony, your brother's statement. Richard slammed his fist on the table. I made all of them. I made their lives. And now they turn on me? Keller kept his voice low. If you plead guilty, maybe you'll avoid the maximum sentence. Richard's laugh was hollow. Plead guilty? To them? To her? Never. He stood, pacing like a caged animal. There's still leverage. There always is. Keller sighed. You're out of leverage. The jury hates you. The press hates you. Even your board has frozen your assets. Richard turned sharply, eyes burning. Not everything's frozen. He reached into his pocket and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. I still have contacts, people who owe me favors. If Victoria wants a war, I'll give her one she'll never forget. Keller frowned. You can't threaten her. You're under surveillance. Richard smirked. Who said anything about threats? I just want to remind her that safety is an illusion. Later that night, at Alexander's penthouse, Victoria sat curled on the couch, watching the evening news. The trial dominated every channel. Public opinion had swung in her favor, but victory felt fragile. She turned to Alexander. Do you ever worry he'll find a way out? Alexander hesitated. Men like Richard always try. But I've faced worse men in business, and none of them stood for long once the truth caught up. The intercom buzzed suddenly. Alexander answered. Yes. A guard's voice crackled through. Sir, there's a package for Miss Collins, no return address. Alexander's instincts prickled. Don't bring it up yet, I'm coming down. Minutes later, in the lobby, he stared at the small brown parcel. No name, no stamp, just a label that read, "To the woman who took everything." He opened it carefully. Inside was a single ultrasound photo, Victoria's, stained with red ink. Underneath, a note, "A mother's worst nightmare never ends, R." Alexander's pulse spiked. He rushed upstairs, hiding the letter before Victoria could see. But she noticed his pale face instantly. What happened? Nothing, he lied, forcing calm. Just reporters sending junk. She frowned. You're hiding something. He sighed. I'm protecting you. Outside, in a dark van across the street, a man lowered his binoculars and called a number. He got the message. Moore says Phase 2 starts tonight, and as lightning cracked over the city, the game turned deadly. Rain poured over the city that night, turning the streets into rivers of shimmering glass. Inside Alexander Reed's penthouse, the lights were dim, the mood uneasy. Victoria Collins sat by the window, tracing patterns on the fogged glass, unaware that danger was closing in on them. Alexander stood in his study, on the phone with Detective Harris, the lead investigator on the Moore case. You're telling me Richard somehow sent a package from custody? How is that possible? Harris sighed. He's not in maximum security yet. He still has reach. Guards, old business partners, men who owe him. We're tightening surveillance, but watch your back. Alexander hung up, jaw clenched. He looked at the sealed envelope sitting in his drawer, the ultrasound photo Richard had sent, and felt a cold fury building. He couldn't let Victoria see it. Not yet. In the living room, Victoria turned. You're restless. What's wrong? He forced a smile. Just the trial. It's taking its toll. She rose from the couch and walked over, her voice soft. You've done enough for me, Alexander. I don't want you getting hurt because of him. He brushed a hand along her arm. I've made peace with that risk. Before she could reply, a loud bang echoed from downstairs. The power flickered. Once, twice, then everything went black. Victoria gasped. The lights. Stay here, Alexander said firmly. He grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and moved toward the hallway. The elevator display glowed faintly red. Someone had stopped it on their floor. He whispered into his earpiece, "Security, report in." No answer. The emergency lights buzzed weakly as he turned the corner. A shadow moved near the stairwell. Who's there? Silence. Then another sound, a metallic click. Before he could react, a masked man lunged out of the darkness, tackling him to the floor. The flashlight rolled away. Alexander struggled, blocking a knife swipe aimed at his chest. Victoria screamed from the living room. Alexander! He threw a punch, knocking the man backward, but another figure appeared. Two of them now. One grabbed Victoria as she tried to run, clamping a gloved hand over her mouth. Get off her! Alexander shouted, charging forward. A fist caught his jaw, sending him sprawling. The taller attacker pulled Victoria toward the balcony. The boss sends his regards, he hissed. Rain lashed through the open glass doors. Victoria kicked and clawed, fighting with everything she had. Alexander lunged again, slamming into the man's back. They crashed into the railing. For a moment, the struggle teetered on the edge of the 20-story drop. With a roar, Alexander overpowered him, twisting the knife from his grip and shoving him to the ground. The second man fled toward the stairwell, disappearing into the storm. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Neighbors had already called for help. Victoria collapsed against Alexander, trembling. He sent them. He really sent them. Alexander pulled her close, rain soaking through his shirt. He's losing control. That's when men like him get reckless. She looked up at him, eyes wide with fear and determination. Then we end this, Alexander. No more hiding, no more running. And somewhere in his cell, Richard Moore smiled at the sound of the thunder, whispering, She's learning to fight back. Good. The next morning, the penthouse was filled with the sound of shattered glass and murmured police radios. Officers photographed the scene while detectives interviewed witnesses. The balcony doors hung broken, the carpet still wet from the night's storm. Victoria Collins sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly at the chaos around her. The cuts on her arm had been bandaged, but her mind was far from calm. A Across the room, Alexander Reed gave a statement to Detective Harris, his voice steady, but his knuckles still bruised. "They were trained," Alexander said grimly. "They didn't come to steal. They came to send a message." Harris nodded. "We found one of them in the alley. Dead. The other's missing. We'll run his prints, but I'd bet my badge Richard Moore ordered the hit." Victoria's voice cracked. "How could he? He's locked up." Harris sighed. "Men like him don't need freedom to cause chaos. They use fear as their currency." After the police left, Alexander sat beside her. "You need to rest." She shook her head. "I'm done resting. He's never going to stop, Alexander, not until one of us ends up buried." He met her eyes. "Then we end it, legally, permanently." Later that afternoon, Alexander met privately with the district attorney. "We need an emergency hearing," he demanded. "Richard Moore violated his incarceration terms by ordering a violent assault. He needs to be transferred to federal custody, maximum security." The DA frowned. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" Alexander slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos from the penthouse attack, audio from a tapped phone call between Richard's associate and an unknown intermediary, and security footage showing the attackers entering the building. "This is proof," Alexander said coldly. "File the motion before he hurts her again." Meanwhile, at the penthouse, Victoria stood on the balcony, staring at the skyline. For months she had lived in fear, of bruises, of headlines, of whispers. But now something inside her shifted. She wasn't the victim anymore. Nathan approached quietly. The DA called. "They're filing new charges, conspiracy to commit murder." Victoria turned. "Then it's almost over." He nodded, then hesitated. "There's something else. Melissa called. She wants to testify again, this time about the hitman. She says she knows who they were paid through." Victoria's heart pounded. "Then we have everything." That night, she and Alexander sat together, watching the city lights flicker against the glass. "You've done more than anyone ever has for me," she said softly. "Why?" He smiled faintly. "Because you remind me what courage looks like. You faced hell and refused to stay there." Tears welled in her eyes. "What if he still finds a way out?" "Then we'll close the door for good," Alexander replied. Far away in the detention center, Richard Moore stared at a newspaper headline. "Attempted attack on victim sparks new charges." He crushed the paper in his fist, fury burning in his eyes. "You think you've won, Victoria? You've just given me my reason to fight harder." He turned to a guard he'd paid off weeks earlier. "Tell my friends outside to prepare. The next move is mine." And as night fell again, the line between justice and vengeance began to blur. The sound of rain on steel echoed through the prison yard as night fell. Guards patrolled the fences, flashlights slicing through the darkness. Inside cell block D, Richard Moore sat calmly on his cot, hands folded, eyes fixed on the clock above the barred window. 11:58 p.m., he smirked. "Right on schedule." A moment later, the power flickered. Then, the entire facility went black. The low hum of generators sputtered out, plunging the prison into silence. Shouts erupted down the corridor. "Power's out," a guard yelled. Richard stood, buttoning his shirt. From beneath his mattress, he pulled a small device, a security card now, stolen weeks earlier. He walked to the cell door, slid the card through the slot, and waited. Click. The lock disengaged. "Freedom," he whispered. As chaos spread through the prison, he moved quickly, blending into the confusion. He slipped into a maintenance hallway where a guard lay unconscious, his keys missing. The plan was flawless, arranged by the same corrupt network he had built over years of deceit. Minutes later, he emerged through a drainage tunnel behind the facility, drenched in filthy water but grinning like a wolf. A black van waited with its headlights off. The door opened, revealing Marcus, the surviving hitman from the penthouse attack. "Miss me?" Richard asked, sliding inside. Marcus smirked. "You're a hard man to kill, boss." Richard leaned back, wiping mud from his hands, and they're about to remember why. Across the city, Victoria Collins stirred awake from another restless sleep. She looked at the clock, 3:06 a.m., and noticed the faint glow of a television in the next room. Alexander Reed sat there, watching the news, his face pale. "What's wrong?" she asked, voice trembling. He turned slowly, his tone grave. "He's gone." Her breath caught. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "Richard escaped during a power failure 3 hours ago. The FBI just confirmed it." The mug slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. No, that can't be real." Alexander moved toward her, steadying her shoulders. They'll find him. He can't hide forever. Tears filled her eyes. You don't know him like I do. He doesn't run, he hunts. Alexander tightened his grip. Then we stay ahead of him. I'll move you and your family into protective custody today. But even as he spoke, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. It was a photo, the view from their building's parking lot. Richard's words were typed beneath it. Did you miss me? Alexander's blood ran cold. He turned toward the window and froze. Down below, under the streetlight, a figure stood beside a black van, head tilted upward, watching. Victoria followed his gaze and gasped. It's him. Alexander yanked the curtains shut. We're leaving, now. Within minutes, they were in his car, racing through the empty streets toward a safe house outside the city. Rain hammered the windshield, lightning flashing across the skyline. Victoria sat trembling, staring into the storm. He won't stop until one of us is gone. Alexander glanced at her, his voice low but certain. Then tonight it ends, one way or another. And miles behind them, Richard's van followed, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a predator's eyes. The mountain road wound through sheets of rain, the headlights of Alexander Reed's car cutting through the fog. Victoria Collins sat in the passenger seat, heart hammering as every flash of lightning illuminated the empty highway behind them. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Alexander's eyes stayed on the road. We're almost there, he said quietly. The safe house is a few miles ahead. But the calm didn't last. In the rearview mirror, a pair of headlights appeared, far back at first, then closing in fast. Victoria's breath caught. Alexander? That car. He glanced at the mirror, his jaw tightening. Stay calm. The black van roared closer, swerving dangerously in the rain. The driver flashed the high beams twice. Then, unmistakably, Richard Moore leaned out the window, rain pelting his face, his smile savage. Hold on, Alexander shouted. He slammed the gas, the car skidding through a sharp curve. The tires screeched across wet asphalt. The van stayed close, bumping the rear bumper hard enough to jolt Victoria forward. Alexander, she screamed. He fought the wheel, heart pounding. He wants us off the road. The van rammed them again. Metal groaned. Victoria clutched the dashboard, tears streaking her face. He'll kill us. Alexander's voice was steel. Not tonight. He yanked the emergency brake, spinning the car sideways. The van shot past them, fishtailing on the slick road. Alexander hit the gas again, slamming the car into the van's side. Both vehicles skidded toward the guardrail. With a final jerk, Alexander swerved, sending the van crashing into the embankment. Sparks erupted as the metal scraped rock. The car slid to a stop a few yards away, smoke rising from the hood. Silence. Then, footsteps. Richard stumbled out of the van, blood trickling from his forehead. He carried a pistol, his laughter echoing through the storm. You think this ends here, Reed? You can't protect her forever. Alexander stepped out slowly, shielding Victoria behind him. You're done, Richard. It's over. Richard raised the gun, hands trembling. You took everything from me. Victoria stepped forward, voice shaking but clear. You did that to yourself. He aimed at her, snarling. You ruined my life. Before he could fire, Alexander lunged, tackling him into the mud. The gun flew from Richard's grip, sliding across the ground. The two men fought brutally, fists, mud, and rain mixing in violent rhythm. Stay down, Alexander shouted, striking him again. Richard spat blood, sneering. You think she loves you? You're just a replacement. Alexander's fist froze midair. His voice was calm now, deadly calm. Maybe, but I'm nothing like you. He hit him one last time, and Richard fell limp. Sirens wailed in the distance, police finally closing in. Victoria ran to Alexander, clutching him as the rain poured harder. It's over, she whispered, sobbing. Please tell me it's over. He held her tight, breathing heavily. It's over for him, but not for us. Behind them, officers surrounded the wreck. Richard groaned weakly, cuffs snapping around his wrists. As dawn broke over the mountains, the storm cleared. Victoria leaned against Alexander, watching the first light pierce the horizon. For the first time, she wasn't running anymore. A month later, the storm had passed, literally and figuratively. The courthouse steps were lined with cameras once again, but this time the mood was different. The nation had followed every twist of Richard Moore's fall from grace. Today would be the end of it all. Victoria Collins stood beside Alexander Reed at the courthouse entrance, her posture calm but her heart racing. Her hands, once trembling, were steady now. She wore a simple navy dress and no jewelry, just quiet strength. Alexander leaned closer. "Are you ready?" She nodded. For the first time in years, yes. Inside the courtroom, tension hummed like electricity. The jury filed in, their faces unreadable. Richard sat at the defense table, a shadow of the man he once was. His designer suits were replaced by a prison uniform. His charm had faded into exhaustion. Yet even now, he tried to smile at Victoria. A hollow, broken attempt at control. The bailiff's voice echoed, "All rise." Judge Avery took her seat. "You may be seated. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreman stood. "We have, Your Honor." Victoria's heart thudded as the courtroom fell silent. The foreman unfolded the paper. On the charges of aggravated assault, financial fraud, and attempted conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty on all counts. The words hung in the air for a breath, then the room erupted. Reporters scribbling, gasps and murmurs filling the space. Victoria closed her eyes, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Alexander reached for her hand under the table, squeezing gently. Richard's face twisted in disbelief. "No, this is wrong," he shouted, struggling against the guards. "She set me up. They all did." Judge Avery's gavel cracked sharply. "Order! Mr. Moore, you will remain silent." But Richard's fury only grew. "You'll regret this, Victoria. You'll—" The guards dragged him away before he could finish. His voice faded as the heavy doors slammed shut behind him. The judge looked at Victoria. "Mrs. Collins, the court commends your courage. Justice has been served." As court adjourned, the cameras outside exploded with light. Microphones thrust forward, voices shouting her name, but Victoria didn't stop to answer. She stepped into the sunlight, breathing deeply. For the first time, the air didn't feel heavy. Nathan was waiting by the car, smiling weakly. "You did it, sis." She hugged him tightly. "No," she whispered, glancing at Alexander. "We did it." Later, on the courthouse steps, Alexander stood quietly beside her. "It's over, Victoria. You're free." She turned to him, voice trembling. "I don't even remember what freedom feels like." He smiled softly. "You're about to find out." As reporters continued to swarm, she looked up at the clear sky. "It's strange," she said. "For so long, I thought the only way to survive was to disappear. But now I want to live, loudly, honestly." Alexander brushed her hand with his. "Then live. That's the best revenge." Behind them, in a prison transport van, Richard stared out through the bars. His empire was gone, his allies vanished, his name disgraced. The man who once had everything now had nothing. He whispered to himself, voice hollow, "She won." And for the first time he was right. The weeks following the verdict felt surreal. For the first time in years, Victoria Collins woke without fear pressing against her chest. The nightmares that once dragged her awake at dawn had quieted, replaced by the sound of birds outside her window, and the calm rhythm of peace. She moved into a small home by the ocean, a quiet stretch of coast an hour outside the city. It wasn't grand like the mansion she'd once shared with Richard. It was modest, filled with sunlight and sea air, and it was hers. One crisp morning she stood barefoot on the porch, a cup of tea warming her hands. Waves crashed below, gulls circling overhead. For a long time she simply breathed, tasting freedom in every inhale. Behind her the sliding door opened. Alexander Reed stepped outside, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, eyes soft from sleep. "Couldn't wait for the sunrise again?" he teased. Victoria smiled faintly. "After everything we've been through, I'm afraid to waste a single one." He joined her, leaning on the railing beside her. "You deserve this. Peace, quiet, a fresh start." She looked up at him, the wind tugging gently at her hair. "We both do." Inside, the sound of laughter echoed. Leo, her baby boy, now toddling and bright-eyed, played with a toy car on the living room floor. Nathan had moved nearby too, helping her rebuild her life. The three of them, once broken pieces, were finally whole again. Alexander glanced through the window, smiling. "He's growing fast. He looks more like you every day." Victoria chuckled softly. "Let's hope he inherits your patience instead of my stubbornness." "Not a chance," he said, laughing. For a while, they stood in silence, the kind of quiet that spoke louder than words. Victoria finally turned to him. "I used to think happiness was something that happened to other people, that it wasn't meant for me." He looked at her with gentle certainty. "You earned it, Victoria. Every scar, every tear, it led you here." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but this time they weren't born of pain. "You saved me, Alexander." He shook his head. "No, you saved yourself. I just showed up when you decided to fight back." She smiled through the tears, the sunlight breaking over the horizon, painting gold across the ocean. Maybe that's what real love is, not saving someone, but standing beside them when they finally save themselves. He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. "Then I'll stand beside you for as long as you'll have me." Inside, Leo giggled, and Nathan's voice called out, "Breakfast's ready." Victoria laughed softly, turning toward the door. "Come on, hero, you're burning daylight." As they stepped inside, the warmth of family wrapped around them, the kind of warmth that comes only after surviving the coldest storms. On the kitchen table lay a newspaper headline, "Justice served, Moore sentenced to life without parole." Victoria glanced at it one last time before folding it closed. "That chapter's done," she whispered. Alexander placed a hand over hers. "And the next one," she smiled, eyes bright with peace. "It's just beginning." Outside, the ocean roared softly against the shore, a lullaby for the healed. 5 years later, the ocean still whispered outside the Collins Reed home. The house had grown with them, brighter, fuller, filled with laughter and memories instead of fear. Victoria Collins Reed stood in front of the mirror, pinning a delicate silver brooch to her dress. It was the same one she had worn to her first court hearing years ago. Back then, it had felt like armor. Now, it was simply a reminder of how far she'd come. In the living room, Leo, now a cheerful 5-year-old, played with his blocks, building towers that reached toward the morning light. Nathan sat beside him, pretending to be impressed as each tower toppled and rebuilt again. "Mom," Leo called, his voice full of pride. "Look, I made a castle." Victoria smiled. "It's perfect, sweetheart, just like you." From the kitchen, Alexander Reed appeared, still handsome, still steady. "Are you ready?" he asked, handing her a cup of coffee. She nodded, "As ready as I'll ever be." Today was important. The Women's Foundation for Survivors, the organization she had founded with Alexander's support, was hosting its 5th anniversary gala. What began as a small community center had grown into a nationwide movement, helping thousands of women escape abuse and rebuild their lives. As they drove into the city, Victoria gazed out the window at the skyline. Once, these tall buildings had felt like prisons. Now, they looked like beacons. At the gala, the ballroom shimmered with light and hope. Cameras flashed, but this time not with scandal, with admiration. Dozens of women she had helped over the years hugged her, their faces glowing with strength. When the announcer called her name, Victoria stepped onto the stage. The applause washed over her like a tide. She took a deep breath, looking out at the sea of faces, survivors, supporters, and believers. Her voice was calm, confident. 5 years ago, I was a woman who thought her story ended in pain. But pain isn't the end. It's the beginning of truth. And truth is freedom. The room fell silent, her words sinking deep. I stand here today not as a victim, but as proof that you can rebuild your life. You can rise again. And when you do, you'll discover that surviving isn't just living. It's teaching others how to live too. Tears shimmered in the crowd. Alexander watched from the front row, pride softening his features. Nathan sat beside him, applauding through misty eyes. When she stepped down, Alexander met her halfway. "You were incredible," he whispered. She smiled, slipping her hand into his. "We both were." Later that night, as the gala ended, Victoria stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights. The air was cool, the stars sharp against the dark sky. Alexander wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You did it," he murmured. She leaned into him, whispering, "No, we did, and it's only the beginning." Far away in a quiet prison cell, Richard Moore stared blankly at a small TV broadcasting her speech. He turned it off and closed his eyes. For the first time, there was no anger left, only silence. Back at the balcony, Victoria looked toward the horizon, her voice soft. "For every woman still in the dark, hold on. Dawn is coming." And as the first light touched the city, Victoria smiled. Finally free. So that's it. Our story finally comes to an end. But if you're still here right now, watching until this very moment, then something in Victoria's journey must have touched your heart in its own quiet way. Maybe it reminded you that healing isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about learning to live stronger because of it. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, "What stands in the way becomes the way." And that's exactly what Victoria did. She turned her pain into purpose. So if you're going through something dark, remember, this is not your ending. It's just a chapter. Keep standing, keep breathing, and one day you'll tell your story too. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need it today, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we'll keep turning pain into power, one story at a time.